Hello everyone, I'm Heather with First Nations OESTA. I'm excited to welcome you to Beyond the Census, Finding Data to Support Grant Proposals with Debbie Gowan-Smith presenting. The most compelling grant proposals are ones that incorporate data that help tell a story while bridging the gap between conditions in your community and the program for which you want funding. In this webinar, we're going to share why grant reviewers like data, the kind of data that strengthens your application, and techniques for finding this data. While the U.S. Census data is a trusted tool for data mining, we're going to explore other methods as well, including those that have been successful for you. We thought this topic would be helpful to anyone kind of doing research for their proposals and doing those proposals. So this webinar is the second webinar in a monthly series as part of the Native CDFI Capital Access Initiative y'all are participating in, which is funded by the Northwest Area Foundation. And I said this during the last webinar, but what's great about this webinar series is that all the topics discussed will focus on different ways to grow your capacity to access capital, which is a challenge we all face. So to get us prepared, I'm now going to share some information with you about the GoToWebinar platform. And I want to let everyone know we'll be recording this webinar, so you'll be able to revisit it later if you like, or if you had to step away or anything like that. So if you could all start by utilizing the chat feature and maybe introduce the organization you represent, and we can test out the system that way. So I'll give you a few seconds to just type into the chat section of the webinar platform. Okay, I don't see anything popping up, but I can see who's joined us. So thank you for joining us. I see Angie, Caleb, Diane, I see Linnell and Anna, and of course Debbie's with us. So welcome everybody. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just please feel free to use that chat or the question feature that you can see on GoToWebinar and just type in your question and we can address it with Debbie as it comes up. So now I'd like to turn the webinar over to Debbie Gowan-Smith. She's with Groundswell Services with a master's degree in economic development and 15 years of direct experience. Debbie's worked with multicultural community groups on 3 continents to pursue their environmental, cultural, and economic goals. Her experience includes 6 years directing a nonprofit organization that empowers Hawaiian communities to reclaim stewardship of the places where they live, work, and play. Today, Debbie specializes in nonprofit capacity building, especially in the areas of participatory assessment processes, strategic planning, community organizing, network development and coordination, and program evaluation. So that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce Debbie Gowan-Smith.
Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for joining us electronically. As Heather said, I've been working in nonprofits for about 15 years. Heather, sorry, do I have control of the mouse now? Oh, it looks like I do. Here we go. So when you work in nonprofits, it just is one of those things you learn how to write grant proposals. So I've been doing grant writing for about 15 years as well, because the two just go hand in hand. So data mining for grant proposals is something I've really learned through experience and through the School of Hard Knocks. And I like what data can bring to grant proposals, so I'm excited to pass along what I've learned, and I hope it's going to be useful for you as well. We tried this before. I'd like to try it again because I'm not familiar with you folks like Heather is. I'd like to know what organizations you're representing today. If you can try again to use that chat feature in the right-hand side of your screen, there's a place for you to type in a message. And if you wouldn't mind trying to type in the organizations that you're representing today, that would be informative for me and helpful. So I'll give you a few seconds and we'll try to see if this will work this time.
Oh, and they're popping in. Can you see them, Debbie?
I can't yet. Maybe it's just a delay.
Oh, no, that's okay. They're popping in on the questions section. So we have Anna LeBeau with Black Hills Community Loan Fund. We have Diane Bercier with Turtle Mountain CDFI. Angie Main just popped in with NACDC Financial Services out of Browning, Montana, a certified native CDFI. And Linnell and Caleb just popped in as Hemoista.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that's great. Looks like we have good representation today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. That's fun to hear who's coming. Oh, see, now it's popping in on my screen, so I think there was just a little bit of a delay. All right, so Heather, do I have the mouse control back?
Oh, not yet. I'm just responding to everybody typing in. That's why it's popping up. Okay.
Okay, great.
I just gave it back to you.
Okay, very good. Sorry, oh, there we go. I feel like there's just a little bit of a delay there when we do the switch. Okay, well, we have about 45 minutes today, and we're going to cover a lot of information. And I'm going to be sure to leave time for questions. So feel free to put questions in the chat box where Heather and I can be looking for them as we go along, but we're also going to leave time at the end for questions if you want to jot them down and save them from the end. Either way works. But here is our plan of action for the webinar. We are going to review why you need data, what kinds of data you need, where to use the data in your proposals, and then, of course, where to find relevant data. Also, please don't feel like you need to write a ton of notes as we're going through everything. I actually sent Heather a list of data sources I'll be mentioning along with a very brief outline of the webinar today, so she can send that out to folks afterwards. So let's start with why. Barbara from the Grantsmanship Center here really says it in a nutshell, and rather than reading the quote for you, I'll just pause for a moment and you can read it yourself. Obviously, when we're writing grant proposals, we want to be convincing, right? So we need data to help us tell our stories in a way that increases our credibility. And if we use it well, it can also sharpen the reader's picture of our place, our people, and our program. Data adds credibility to your proposal. It tells the reader, basically, I'm not making this stuff up. Data generated by other groups, which is known as third-party data, provides outside confirmation for the point you're trying to make. And data that your organization generates, like findings from focus groups or a survey and that kind of thing, that kind of data provides a first-person, more intimate viewpoint that really brings the facts and figures to life. So what kind of data are we looking for when we're writing grant proposals? Hard data is the facts and figures, findings from research, and those kinds of things, the examples that you see here on your screen. This kind of data typically sets the scene for our story and provides a 30,000-foot view of the place, people, and problem we're discussing. Soft data, on the other hand, is like quotes and stories and anecdotes, which really bring the reader in for a closer, more intimate look at the people, place, and problem we're discussing. So we're taking the reader from that 30,000-foot view all the way down to a face-to-face view, so the reader can learn about the lives of one or maybe even a few examples of the broader story. So the idea is we use data, we weave together the hard data like facts and figures and research with quotes, stories, and anecdotes to really paint a clear picture for the audience, because they may know very little or even nothing about your community and your program. We're also looking for data that helps to answer questions about why the program we're addressing exists, who or what it impacts, where and when that impact occurs, what happens because of that problem or impact, and the degree to which it makes an impact. Now, the most important point to remember when thinking about what data to include is that it should be relevant to your program. And I know this may seem really obvious, but I've been tripped up by this, and I'll have an example of that here in a second. And I've seen other people get tripped up by it too. The key is not to just use any data and all data you can find. You want to include the pieces that keep your story on target and topically focused. You want to make sure that your data is current, like the most current data you can find, and rely on facts and figures rather than emotions. This all helps you get as close as possible to the people and place you're describing. So, for example, if your program serves a specific geographic area, then the data should reflect that area rather than the entire region or the entire state. And if your program is tribal, you try to use data for your tribe rather than for all American Indians. So my example of a time I got tripped up over relevant data was just 2 weeks ago, despite having written grant proposals for the past 15 years. Yes, I still get tripped up sometimes. I was writing about a program in Hawaii that empowers youth who are considered to be at risk. So these are youth who have dropped out of high school. Maybe they've been in trouble with the juvenile justice system. Maybe they're homeless. So they're really dealing with a variety of struggles. And the program's approach is to immerse these kids in cultural education to help them find themselves and get back on track. So when I was looking for data, I found a lot of data on juvenile crime, on dropout rates, on poverty, which are all things that can definitely be linked to at-risk youth. But as I was writing the proposal using this data, I realized that I was actually taking my readers off topic. I was trying to use poverty and juvenile justice data to write a story about a program that doesn't actually specifically address poverty or juvenile justice outcomes. So I refocused on the topic of cultural education, which was extremely helpful, and I found current research about the impact of cultural education on Indigenous youth. And then I did one better and found a great study done recently by Kamehameha Schools about cultural education of Hawaiian youth. So now with my data, I was topically on point with cultural education. I was current with a 2013 study that with results published in 2014. I was using facts and research to tell the story, and I was focused on Hawaiian youth in Hawaii. And I realize we're not always so lucky. It's not always possible to find the exact data you need to link a problem to a program. And Heather even mentioned to me yesterday that she was working on a proposal once, and she found 6 totally different numbers to quantify the same exact problem. So sometimes you can use data to show that everyone understands that a problem exists, even if everyone can't agree on the scope or the scale of the problem. So no matter what data you can or cannot find, your goal is really to draw this perfectly clear link in your story between the data you choose to use and the people, place, and program you're discussing. So now we're going to shift to where to use the data in your proposal. Once you've gathered the data, this becomes, somewhat self-explanatory. Data is especially important when you're describing the need your program addresses. So this is sometimes called a needs assessment or a problem statement in a typical proposal format. And this typically includes the problem to be addressed, the community or place your program serves, and the target population or people that will benefit from your program. I've got a screenshot here of the NACA proposal. So this information would be under the purpose section and the product section. So this screenshot is of the product, is part of the product spreadsheet in the NACA proposal. So you can see here that they're asking for some really specific data like poverty, local poverty rate, median household income, the unemployment rate, and they're wanting you to compare that with national numbers. So then in your narrative, we weave in our data to strengthen our story. So just as an example, if you have a program that serves the unemployed, then you can use data to show the number of people in your area who are unemployed, the unemployment rate, the causes of unemployment in your area, the demographics of those who are unemployed, how unemployment in your area compares with unemployment in other areas of the city, county, state, or nation, and the problems in your area caused by unemployment. And then you can use your soft data to bring in the voices of those affected to describe how unemployment has impacted your community or challenged families in your community. We also use data in the program or project description. If this is a new program or project, what data has your organization gathered to determine that this is the program to address the target audience's problem within the context of this community? Same question, if it's a program that's been running for a few years, what data do you have to support this idea that your program is addressing the problem you've described in a way that meets the target audience's need within the context of your community? So again, with the example of unemployment, what data tells the story of why a CDI program that lends to a target audience of, say, small businesses is the right approach to the problem of unemployment in this community? So that's the kind of thing that data can do for you. It's also a good place to use data in such a way that your readers are left with hope that the problem you've presented can be reduced or alleviated. In the section where you talk about your goals and objectives, you want to create objectives based on the data presented in your needs statement or your problem statement section. So again, with the example of unemployment, if you've talked about unemployment rates through the needs statement, then you'd better have goals and objectives about alleviating unemployment. In the NACA proposal, your goals and objectives are going to go under the performance section. So the other place to use data is basically anywhere where data is helpful to provide context. So, for example, the NACA grant specifically asks for information related to your community collaborations and partnerships, and this is in a section titled Community Coordination. They ask you to describe how development plans and initiatives impact your target market and your program goals. So this is going to be a really critical place to use data showing that you know those development plans for your area and you can link them directly to the decisions that are happening within your organization about the people that you serve and the program that you use to serve them. So now let's talk about where you can find the data you need. Just to let you know, I've kept this slideshow fairly general rather than showing specific links, just because tons of links on the slide aren't pretty, it's not easy to read, and they're not very effective because you can't write them all down. So as I mentioned before, we're going to send out after the webinar with information from this section and actually a ton more links than I was able to even include in the webinar. So just, again, don't worry about writing down all the notes. Just for background, as you look for data, please don't use anything you see that just says what you want to hear. Use only reputable sources, and these are sources that your potential funder will consider reputable. So these are sources like government agencies, nonprofit associations or organizations, academic or peer-reviewed journals, and those sorts of research. Also, keep in mind that it's best if you can find and use multiple sources of data rather than just one. It simply adds credibility. And for the same reason, you'll want to ensure that your proposal doesn't rely exclusively on your own organization's data. Unfortunately, funders will question whether you are truly objective about the data. So if your organization has data, that's fantastic. I just recommend that you find some third-party sources that can back it up. So before we go through the sources that I have used, I'm interested in hearing from you folks about which sources you have found for relevant data for your proposals. If you can take that poll really quickly, we can see what we all have found for here.
And I just launched it, so everybody should be able to see it and participate.
And you can select all that apply.
Okay, we have 100%. I'm going to hit manage now. Okay, so for the polls, we had 100% of you using government sources, 60% using tribal, 60% using academic, 80% using nonprofit, non-government, and 100% using your own organization.
Oh, that's really fantastic. I'm excited to hear about 100% using your own organization, because sometimes that can be really challenging for people to achieve given different kind of capacity. So that's great. I'm just going to wait a second for Heather to give the mouse control back to me, and then we'll continue on.
Okay, you should have it back now.
Okay, thanks. There we go. Sorry about the delay. Okay, so as we just found in our poll, really the most obvious source is public databases. These can be from federal, state, county, and even city sources. Many government agencies or departments have these large amounts of data available for public use. And of course, this includes what you see here on your screen, the U.S. Census, and it attempts to be a count of people in the United States. It's also affiliated with the American Community Survey, which creates survey-based estimates of how people live and characteristics indicative of how they are doing. I think we all recognize that these sources have shortcomings, but really they're still considered reputable sources of information by funders. Beyond the census, many federal departments have information that might be relevant to your proposal, though typically these are from a national perspective. So here you see an example from the Department of Commerce, which has an Office of Native American Affairs. And here is the U.S. Small Business Administration, which has an Office of Native American Affairs as well. And of course, the U.S. Department of Interior's Indian Affairs Bureau is shown here. There's a ton more. Almost every department or overarching department within the U.S. federal government has some sort of relationship with tribal groups. So you can find information from almost any federal agency. Just browse the government agency website. You can even place an exploratory phone call to the department that is most closely related to the field your program addresses. And some of them even have offices or branches in your state, and so that's always the best number to try first. State departments often have subject that's relevant to you as well. So here we have two examples. On the left is the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and then on the right there is the Office of Indian Education within the Department of Education. And they even have a data section to their website. Other examples, in the state of Maryland, there is a Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and it has an Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities. And these different state sources have conducted research or been a party to research that they post on their site, so it can be really helpful information for you. Even county departments have localized, and really the more local it is, the more relevant it is, so that's a source you should check out as well. You can often find economic information, crime statistics, education data, and more. So for example, from this county, there's a demographic link to county-specific demographic data right here on their homepage. And then I saw that I think it was 60% of you have used tribal sources before. So if your tribe does gather data, you can peruse the website, but also don't forget to place calls to relevant departments or committees to inquire about data that they may collect and that may be available to you. Again, the best data is data that is most closely to your people, place, and problem. So tribal data is at a great scale compared with state or federal data. Quite a few of you also said that you have used academic sources before. There are so many universities and colleges that have research centers related to American Indian data. So even if it's outside your own state or your own region, you can still find data that might be relevant to you. I found Arizona State University has the Labriola National American Indian Data Center, UCLA has the Center for Health Policy Research. They have an American Indian Research Program. Harvard University has a Native American program. The University of Minnesota has a Center for American Indian and Minority Health. The University of New Mexico supports the American Indian Business Association. And the page that Heather's going to send out with a bunch of links has several more, and I'm really just scratching the surface there. These are all treasure troves for data. You can also look at relevant studies in academic journals, which you can access through university libraries, sometimes local libraries, and even use Google Scholar, which is just an online search engine that's supported by Google. You'll find that many of these articles are restricted to people with subscriptions, like university libraries, so you might only be able to see the abstract, but often you can find the whole article available as well. If you're not affiliated with the university or college, and if you don't have a partnership with the university or college who can provide access to these articles, you can always see if a local library can gain access to the article. I have had success going that route before. And then if that doesn't work, you can often pay a rental fee of somewhere around $5 to $10, which gives you temporary access to the entire article. And I've used that route as well. And then, not strictly academic, don't forget to look at the websites of think tanks or research groups like the Economic Policy Institute or Pew Research Institute. They often have published information and published data that can help provide context in your proposal. Of course, the nonprofit sector is also very active in research. Try thematically relevant associations and trade groups, and some of them have both national and local chapters. And wherever there's a local chapter, I would start with the local chapter first. You can also try national, state, tribal, and local nonprofits. So, of course, here you can see the national nonprofit, the First Nations Development Institute, which is OESA's parent organization. And they have a knowledge center with some really relevant, really interesting studies. And OESA's studies are there and also on OESA's own website. They have a portion of their website posting their research studies. So I'm sure you'll find that useful. And then there's the National Congress of American Indians, and you can see that they have a tab devoted to policy research. Other nonprofits focused on American Indians include the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, the American Indian Business Leaders, National Indian American Association, and really many, many others that have scopes that are national, statewide, local, and tribal. And again, I've included several of these in the sheet that's going to go out to you folks after the webinar. And again, it's just, it could go on for hundreds of pages. There are so many nonprofit organizations out there. Don't forget about foundations too. Foundations are often engaged in research. So here you have an example on the right-hand side of the Kellogg Foundation and on the left side the Annie E. Casey Foundation. So these foundations, as other large foundations, are investing in research because they just want to make sure that they're targeting their dollars in an effective manner. So you can really find some interesting data on their sites as well. So now I've got to throw in a note of caution. If I do a Google search and a Wikipedia article pops up, I might still visit it and I might even read it, but I never use the information written there in my proposals. Because Wikipedia is an open source format where anybody can create an entry, the reliability, credibility is questionable. So the way I do use Wikipedia, you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, if the person who wrote the article is doing a good job, they will include lots of sources to verify the data or the information that they're including in their article. So I will go to that notes section and sometimes find some good sources that I can then go check out and go to the original source and find some data from those places. When I do them carefully, a Google search can return some really interesting results, but you just have to be careful with this because the information you find needs to pass the criteria that it is information or data from a reputable, well-respected, and unbiased organization with current information. And then it sounds like you guys are already doing this. Don't forget to look within the doors of your own organization. So hopefully you have data and information there that you can use in your proposals. This can include past grant reports that demonstrate effectiveness. You can use data from previous or existing programs to show the need for services. Maybe your organization completed community surveys or market analyses, which are great sources of data and information for proposals. Since everybody said that they're already doing this, it sounds like you all have the capacity. There are always good opportunities to partner with colleges, universities, even high school classes to do community surveys if you need to do some more. So let's just do a really small case study. Let's say I'm a CDFI in South Dakota that is writing a proposal to support small business lending on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And just in full disclosure, I have never, ever in my life written a proposal for anyone in South Dakota. So I just used my own tips here to try to find information. Obviously, somebody with real knowledge of the place and people and problems would be in a much better position to data. But so given those limitations, what did I find? From the federal system, I looked at the Small Business Administration and specifically its South Dakota district and found some information about businesses. From the state system, checked out the Governor's Office of Economic Development, which had some data also on business development. Locally, I found the Pine Ridge Chamber of Commerce, and if I were truly writing this proposal, I'd contact them by phone directly to see if they had conducted research relevant to my proposal, because I didn't find any on their website. I'd also sift through the tribal website and contact committee offices for information and data. From the nonprofit sector, I look into the South Dakota Indian Business Alliance, which is a nonprofit which happens to have completed and published in-depth market analyses for South Dakota's 9 reservations. A Google search for American Indian business data and Pine Ridge Reservation small business led me to 2 studies which is absolutely packed with data. First, the Academic and Business Research Institute published an article in 2014 titled A Study of Native American Small Business Ownership Opportunities for Entrepreneurs, which had some data I could. And another report, which was published in February of this year, was titled Strengthening the Pine Ridge Economy, a Regional Equity and Opportunity Assessment. And this was a study that was written by Policy Link, which is a think tank, and the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University, and then tribal partners as well. So here I had, government sources, academic sources, think tank sources, tribal sources, nonprofit sources. Basically, from this really cursory glance, I found a lot of very good leads for data mining. So a piece of advice is not to wait until your next big grant deadline to start compiling some research. If you can task somebody now in your organization with just finding sources and gathering data that's relevant to your place, your people, and your programs, it's super helpful. You can just create a shared web folder on Google Docs or Dropbox or whatever system you're comfortable with and start compiling this stuff. You can look at the government, tribal, academic, and nonprofit sources available to you and then save the relevant links. If you find research papers or reports and articles with good relevant data, save them now and you'll save yourself loads of headaches later when you're facing a looming deadline. So I'm sure that you all have a lot to share in this area as well, and I'd really like us to share our input with one another. I know I've missed things. So where do you go to find data to use in grant proposals? If you can, again, use the chat box feature and type in your answers, then we can all learn from each other. And I'll pause for a few seconds while you answer. Heather, are you seeing any answers coming through? Because I don't see them popping up on my chat screen.
No, I don't see anything in either the chat screen or the question screen. Is there anything for the group? Is there anything that you think we left off? Oh, I just saw some pop up. I'm gonna reply, and then you should see them. I'm getting a bunch of them
okay.
now.
Okay, great.
You see that pop up?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's great.
Okay, so we have a couple of responses now.
Yeah, it's nice to see the state sources, previous reports that people have written within their own organizations, it sounds like. Partners, that's another really good source as well, yeah. So people that you work with probably collect data. And research done by universities. Oh, Montana State Economic Development, yeah, so there are often economic development organizations that are either state or county or even city. That can be really good sources. Well, thank you for those of you who answered. That's really helpful. It's always wonderful because you all have experience too, and to share with each other is a powerful thing. Thank you very much for sharing. And then, Heather, do I have control again of the...
Oh, you should. Is it not working for you?
Oh, yeah, now I got it. Thanks. Okay, so I just got to cover a few nitpicky things. If you're going to use data, there are just a couple of things that hopefully you're already doing in your proposals, but just as a reminder. So often, if you're using percentages, it's really helpful to provide the raw number and the percentage together. So for example, if you're saying, you know, your program serves 26 people, it may not sound like much, but if 26 people represents, you know, 70% of the population in that area, then that's pretty significant, and it provides the needed context. And then it works the other way too. Maybe maybe your proposal says that 5% of the people in your area are dealing with a specific challenge, but you know, maybe you live in an area where 5% of the people equates to 1,000 people. So when you use both the percentage and the raw number, the reader just has a much better sense of the scale of what you're talking about. And as I mentioned toward the beginning of the webinar, you probably shouldn't include all the data you find. This is called a data dump, and it's really a stinker. It's confusing to people. It's overwhelming to people. So you need to constantly be asking ourselves, what am I trying to communicate, and is this the data to do that? Finally, cite your sources in the proposal. Sorry, this comes from my journalism background, but if you cite your sources, it really proves that you're not just pulling facts out of thin air that suit your case. And it provides the reader with a way to find the data himself or herself, and then they can substantiate what you found and perhaps even learn more. And just as an aside, some people will insist that you must use formal academic citation formats in your proposal, and really that's only necessary if your proposal is to an academic funder for an academic purpose. Otherwise, a more journalistic approach is really sufficient, with the author's name, the title of the study or chapter, the journal or book or other larger publication in which you found the information, and the the date it was published. So the point is just to provide enough information that someone can find the data with a simple search. My preference is you can, provide the sources in footnotes rather than in the main text of the narrative. I think it's better because I think if you have all that information in the narrative, it can be distracting. But I also recognize that there are proposal formats that don't allow for that. So you have to go ahead and put it right there in the narrative. So as I've said a couple times, we will provide a list of links to different sources. And again, there are so many sources out there. It seems like there's such an emphasis on research and evaluation and evidence-based practice that everyone is producing data. But I've provided at least a handful of links to get you started. And we still have a few minutes left for questions. So if you have one, you can use that chat box and submit it, and Heather and I will work together to get them answered.
I'm not seeing any pop up. I'm not sure if maybe you did such a fabulous job, there are no questions, or people are thinking they can grab a lot of the information from the sheet we're going to share afterwards too.
Okay. Well, that's fine. People know how to get a hold of you, and you know how to get a hold of me. So if there are other questions that come up afterward, we can work together to try to answer them.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I want to thank Debbie for that wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. I hope we provided information that will be useful to you as you apply for the grant funding in the future. Regardless of the type of proposal, I think this kind of covered so many different areas. Again, just to reiterate, we're also going to share webinar notes and those links to you all. I'll email them to you, and I'll also post it on the Native TDFI Capital Access Initiative website. I also want to make sure and point out there's a very brief survey that should pop up when you close this webinar, and just please fill it out. It helps us track this webinar series and make sure that we always continue to improve. Also, next month's webinar is going to take place December 8th at noon Mountain Time. We're going to be discussing capitalization with Michael Swack from the Carsey Institute at the University of New Hampshire. And I'm going to be sending out more information on this afternoon, so you should get it maybe within the next hour or so. That being said, have a wonderful rest of your day.